let me show you how to create this cool landing page. You basically have your logo, you have a navigation bar where you can hover, you have a floating laptop as well as some information about your company, for example, and you have some socials at the left bottom. So let's get started, guys. Let's start by creating our index.html, and inside of this index.html we are going to generate a basic template. We are going to say that this is our home page, and we create a header, a main section, as well as a footer. We divide our page into different subsections. Now we can open our website with the live server, and this is what it looks like. Now let's also create a style.css, and let's link our style sheet to our HTML file by using link:/CSS, and now we have href to our CSS file, and this should work now. So let's go inside of our style sheet and use the universal selector and use a margin of 0, a padding of 0, and let's use box sizing of border box as well. Now let's also target our header, and let's say our header has a background that is equal to a radial gradient or a couple of radial gradients. Feel free to just copy those colors in if you want to. It would take a lot of testing, so I'm not going to type them out entirely, but we are also going to say that we want to have a width of 100% for the header and a height of 100% of the viewport height. And now it basically looks like this. So this is our background for now. Let's get started by creating our navigation bar. So inside of our header, we are going to create a div, and inside of this div, we'll have our navigation bar, and we have one logo at the left. So we'll create another div, and we say that we have a paragraph that says logo, for example. And now we have another div, which is our navigation bar, and inside of this navigation bar, we will have different anchor tags which represent our sections. So we will say that we have A that goes to home, for example. Then we have another anchor that goes to web development like so. And then the next one goes to team, for example. And the last one goes to contact. So now we have those anchor tags right here. Now it's getting time to style them. And I will use a lot of object-oriented CSS, and you'll see what I mean by doing so in a couple of seconds. So I'm going to define a class that says .flex, and that class will set the display to flex. Now I will also define a class .gap1 that will create a gap of maybe 10 pixels. So now I will use the class of flex for my nav bar, and now we will have a flex box right here, and I will also use gap1, and now we should have a gap between our items. And this is basically object-oriented CSS, so I basically write the classes, and now I can reuse the classes over and over again if I want to create a flexbox, for example. So let's say I also want to create a flexbox right here to use flex for our logo and for our nav bar. And now I basically have flex right here as well. Now I'm also going to create a .white class that sets the color to white, and I'll also give this white class to all of my anchor tags for now. So I'm going to copy this line right here. Maybe I'm also going to use ._none to create text decoration of none, and then I'm going to copy _none and give the class to our anchor tag as well. And now I'm going to copy this class right here because this is basically how I want our anchors to look like, and I'm going to use that one, and that one for now. And this is what it looks like. Now I'm also going to create .font large, which is basically going to have a font size of, let's try 40 pixels for now, and I'm going to give my logo the class of font -large. And now we have this big logo text right here, which doesn't look too good, so I'm going to use white as well, and I'm going to create another class that says .bold, and that one is obviously going to have font weight of bold. So now I can give that one the class of bold as well, and now we have this logo text right here, which still doesn't look too good. Maybe we should also work on using a different font size, and in order to do so we are going to incorporate a different font, and we're going to Google fonts, and we are going to search for Roboto, for example. But obviously you can choose whatever font suits your needs, but I really think Roboto might fit to this project. So I'm going to go to get embedded code. I'll basically copy those link tags right here, and I'm going to paste them into the header of our style sheet. Now I'll also use this line here, and I'm going to copy this one, which says font family Roboto sans serif, and I'm going to say inside of our body tag, which doesn't exist yet, so we're going to create the body tag. We say everything inside of our body uses font family Roboto sans serif. And now once we go to our website, we basically have Roboto right here. Right below our flex spokes, I'm also going to create a class that says .justify between, and this class will have justify content of space between. So we're going to copy this class and we give this class to our flexbox at the top to basically create space between those items. And you'll see what this looks like in a second. So we are going to use this class, and now we have the space between our navigation bar and our logo. And the next thing we can do is create a line item center. So we're going to use .items minus center, and we say this one has a line items of center. And now if I use items center right here as well, the items should be centered as well. And as you can see, they are. Now it would also be kind of cool to have some form of margin or padding, in our case margin around our logo and margin around our navigation bar. So I'm going to create, let's use .m2 for example, because maybe we want to have m1 later on, and let's say we want to create margin of 20 pixels in all directions, and now we're going to use M2 for our logo as well as our navigation bar. And now we have this margin. Maybe margin isn't the best property, so we're going to create T2 as well, which will obviously work for padding instead of margin. And now we use P2 for this tag instead of margin 2. And now we have this effect. Obviously, I think it's probably a little bit too much, and it's not enough on the left and on the right, and it's too much on the top. So I'm going to use, or I'm going to generate the class P2 PY2, which is basically for the y-axis, and I'm going to say, let's create margin top of 20 pixels, margin bottom of 20 pixels, and now I'm going to create .px3 for example, and I'm going to say this one, or let's say 4, and let's say this one has a margin right of 40 pixels and a margin left of 40 pixels. So I'm going to use py2 and px4. So now I basically have I used margin instead of padding. That was my bad, so obviously we need to use padding for px. And we're going to replace margin right here, and now we have this effect, which looks actually already a lot better in my opinion. So the next thing we can basically do is also create a bigger gap for the items, because I think this is like definitely not enough. So I'm going to copy and paste this one. I'm going to create gap 3, and I'm going to say, yeah, this one has 30 pixels for example. And now we obviously need to use gap 3 instead of gap 1 right here. And now we basically have a bigger gap. Maybe I'm going to use 40 pixels though, because I think 40 pixels looks a little bit better. Yeah, and this is what it looks like. So now we have this kind of website. Obviously we will style our navigation bar slightly different later on, or maybe we can do it just right now. Okay, for now, let's say this one goes to the index.html, and we'll see what we are going to do with the other hrefs later on. But for now, let's say this one goes to the index.html. And now I obviously want to target inside of our navbar every anchor tag that has an href equal to input.html, like so. And I want to say this one has a background of white. Maybe I had a typo in here, so I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to say I want to copy this one, and now we have this effect, yeah. Maybe it was just a typo. So now we have this background. Obviously it doesn't look too good. So maybe I'm going to replace this gap 3 with gap 1. And now I'll give every class a px of 4 as well, for example. So we have some more padding in the x direction. And now it looks like this. Now let's also maybe use, we have py2. So let's also use py2 for the individual items by doing so. And now we should have this effect basically. but I think py2 is probably a little bit too much, so we are going to create py of 1, which just has a padding top and bottom of 10 pixels. So now I'm going to replace the 2 with the 1 by doing so, and now we have this effect. Now I also want to have a border radius, and for this element I want to have a color of black for the text, obviously, because this one is the selected one. And I also want to use a border radius of 15 pixels. And let's just say we want to use 30 pixels, so we really have rounded corners. And now we have this effect. So the selected page is basically looking like this, and all of the other pages are looking like this. And now we can also use a hover effect. So let's say we are just going to copy the exact same effect. So let's make it like this. Let's say nav a : hover, and now we have the same effect once we hover. So once we hover over these elements, you can see this is what it looks like. And obviously you could adjust this according to your needs. And now maybe also like make this text a little bit shorter, because yeah, it doesn't look too good. And now we have this effect basically. And in my opinion, this looks pretty cool already. So now that we have our navigation bar, let's keep going. First of all, let's say, okay, this one, bam bam, is our comment, and this is our navigation, just to keep track of what we're doing. So let's copy this comment, and down below our navigation div we'll create, this is our PC section, and here we will have an animation. So let's start by creating another container, and inside of this container we'll use an image, and that image is basically our laptop. So we're going to go into our images folder, which I'll also provide in the description. So we're going into images, and we say, let's take our laptop.png, we create an alt of laptop. And once we open the site, you can see that we have this laptop, which obviously looks terrible. So let's go ahead and create 2 more sections. One is a section that has an h2 that says what we offer, for example. And then it has a short paragraph that has a couple of words, maybe like 20 words. I don't know, doesn't really matter. Maybe that's a little bit, yeah, maybe that's not enough, but we can, yeah, add words later on. And now we are just going to copy the exact same container, and we paste the exact same container below our image. So now we give this container, our first container, we give it the class of maybe animation wrapper. And then we are going to target this animation wrapper. We say that this one has a flex box as well. We're going to use justify between, like so. And then we'll say that we want to have items center as well. And now you can see we basically have this effect. Still doesn't look too good, but it will look pretty good in a couple of seconds. Maybe we can also say that we want to use, instead of justify between, we can also maybe just copy this line. We say justify round instead of between. And here we will obviously want to use space around instead of space between. So we are going to copy this class and we paste it in here, and now we have space around our items. Obviously still doesn't look much better, but it's kind of right. Obviously for this class we can also say we want to use class white, as well as for the paragraph we are going to use class white. And now we have this effect already. Looks a lot better, still not perfect. So let's go and start styling our laptop, which will have the class of laptop. And now we're going to target this laptop class. We have to dot laptop for now, and we give our laptop a width of 40%, for example. And maybe that is still too big, so we're going with 30%, and that might be kind of right. Let's go with 27, and this looks kind of right to me. So next up, let's go and also add an animation to our laptop, and we can do so by going to add keyframes identifier, which will be float in our circumstance, and we are going to create some keyframes at 0%, and we'll also add some keyframes at 25%. We'll add some more keyframes at 50%, 75 and 100. So we're going to type 100 right here. Then we're going to say that these ones are 50% and those ones are 75%. And now we obviously want to rotate our laptop slightly. So we're going to use transform and we're going to use rotate of maybe, yeah, let's say 2 degrees. So 2 degrees is our starting value. And now it looks like this. Looks a little bit better in my opinion already, but yeah, definitely some work to do. So let's also add an H1 above our page right here. And let's say H1 says web development. Obviously this could just be the company name or whatever you basically want. Let's say we also want to create a font XXL, for example, right below our font large. Let's say dot font XXL, and we have a font size of 80 pixels. Let's also create a class dot center that makes text align center basically. So let's use font XXL for our web development header, font minus XXL, and let's use white, and let's use text minus center. And now we have those effects basically. And I think it was just center, that's why the text isn't centered. And now we have this effect. Obviously some margin would be pretty cool as well, so I create a class that has mt.mt4, for example, and we say we want to have a margin top of 40 pixels, for example. And now we are going to use mt4 on our h1. So let's use mt4. We are going to save the document. And I think this is like still, yeah, definitely not enough. So I'm going to create mt8. Let's use mt8 and let's create 80 pixels. Let's say mt8 is going to be used right here, and yeah, that's a little bit better. I still would say, yeah, could experiment with the margin, but it looks pretty all right to me. So the next thing we want to do is add an animation to our laptop, and we're going to do so by creating a float animation. So first of all, we obviously might want to create some more space right here. So we can, for example, say that we want to have a translate Y property of maybe 50 or 60 pixels, doesn't really matter too much. So we have 60 pixels right here, but I think 40 will probably look slightly better. And now we have this effect, and now it looks pretty good to me. And yeah, we are going to go ahead and create an animation for our transform property. So we're going to copy this property in here, and let's say we want to go from our base value to maybe 0 within the first 25% of our animation, and let's say we want to go to maybe, let's say 0 degrees. Then we are going to go upwards again to maybe 40 pixels, and we are going to go to minus 2 degrees though. Then let's say we copy this one again, and we are going, or let's say we are going to minus 3 degrees here. And then let's copy this one again. Let's say we are going to translate to maybe 0 pixels once again, and we're going to go to 1 degree. And as a last step, we might just go back to our initial transformation by copy and pasting this one. So now we're going to use this float animation for our laptop by using animation. We'll use the name float. We use a duration of maybe 20 seconds, a timing function that could, for example, be ease in out, a delay of 0, an iteration count of infinite, and we can delete the last 2 properties. And now we're going to save this, and we have this floating effect. And obviously this one is a super simple effect. You can obviously create cooler animations by having more rotation or more changes in rotations, for example, which would actually make it probably look a little more dynamic, but I don't want to bore you for hours by typing the same animations out. So the next thing we are going to do is create a container that just contains 80% of the entire space. So it doesn't go from left to right, but rather stays somewhat centered, if you want to say so. And the first thing I'm going to do so is create dot v80, so a class that uses 80% of the width, and we're going to say let's use 80% of the width. And I'm going also to create, this should be fine for now. It's probably smarter to create another wrapper right here, which is a div. I'm going to copy and paste everything inside, and I'm going to create v class of v80. So this one takes up 80% of the available space now, and I'm going to use flex, and I'm going to use justify center. And I'm not sure if I've created this class yet. I don't think I have. So we're going to create justify center, and we use justify content of center. And now we can use this class, copy and paste this one, and we're going to go and replace justify center with justify center. But maybe we don't even need v80, to be honest. Instead, we are going to justify this content in the center, but obviously this content should not take up 100% of the width, so this should work. So now this container basically takes up 80% of the available space, and this container here justifies the content, so the 80% inside of in the center, if you want to say so, if that makes sense. So I'm also going to create a gap between the items right here and say I want to have gap of, I don't know what kind of values I've defined already. So I'm going to take a look. Gap of 3 would be possible, for example. So I'll say gap 3. And now we have this gap between our laptop and the other items. But I think maybe I'm going to give my laptop slightly more size. So I'm going into laptop. I say, let's use 35% for the laptop. And now it looks like this. And I think this looks a little bit cooler already. So now I want to style this and this section basically. So I'm going to go into my second section. I'm going to start with the first section, and I say that my first section will also have a text align. I'm going to create dot left, for example, or text left, and I say text align is left, and I'm going to create dot text right, and so I say text align is right. So now I'm going to copy text left, and let's say I want to have this class centered to the left, which is already the case, so I don't really need a class, and the first one should be centered to the right, or should be aligned to the right, to be precise. So I'm going to use text right, and I'm going to save this, and I'm going to use text right for the paragraph as well. And now we have this effect. So this one is at the right, and this also is aligned to the right, and this one is aligned to the left. So maybe I can also use class white right here and class white right here. And maybe I can also say I want to use MT of, let's see what kind of margin tops we have. We only have 8, so let's use MT of 2 maybe. And let's say, that one has 20 pixels. And let's add M2, which is probably too much in my opinion. I don't know, but we'll see in a second. So we're going to save the document. The mistake is obviously that I need to give the M2 to my paragraph. And now we have this effect, but to me it looks like it's a little bit too much. So I'm going to create MT of 1, and I'd say 10 pixels. And this might look a little bit better. So we're going to replace M2 with M1. And let's do the same with our second paragraph. And now we already have this effect. Let's also use an underline for our container, basically. And let's say, this paragraph, let's give this paragraph a class, or let's give this heading a class of, let's say, animation heading, minus heading. And let's copy this heading, basically. And let's say dot animation heading colon after, content is empty, display is block, width is probably 40%, height is 4 pixels, background is white. And now let's take a look at our document. So we basically have this effect already. Obviously for our animation heading, let's say right, because this one is aligned, or let's say the left one, because it's the left one. I thought because it's aligned to the right, but let's say, yeah, it's the left heading. So we're going to use this class. We're going to copy and paste this class. We're going to give this class to our left animation heading. And now we have this effect. Obviously a little bit too much. So I'm going to use 25% for the width, and I'm going to use position relative for our animation heading left, so I can use position absolute for animation heading left after element. And now I can say, let's align this one to the right and give it a gap of 0. So now we have this effect. Maybe this is still like a little bit too long, so let's go with 18%, and now we have this effect. And I think this looks kind of cool, especially if, yeah, this text would be a little bit longer. Now we could also say that we want to have a margin top of 2, because I think some spacing looks a little bit cooler. And let's say that we want to have, what can we offer you right here? So now we have this text. I think it would look cooler if we have 25% now and a margin top of maybe 5 pixels as well. And I think it would be maybe, let's go to 30%, and let's say we have a height of 3 pixels. So now we have this effect. And I think this looks pretty cool to me. So we're going to do the same for our other element, which is going to be our animation heading right, and right as well here. And now we'll have a same amount of width, but we're going to start at the left basically. And now we're going to copy and paste this class to our second heading, like so. And now we should have this effect. And we could, for example, we could just go ahead and copy and paste this container once again, because this might make it a little bit easier. So we're going to copy and paste it. Now we are going to use animation heading right here, obviously. And we are also going to remove text right, and we're going to remove text right, and now it should look pretty good. So now we have the exact same effect. Obviously you can use different text for the left and for the right, but that's obviously up to you. The next thing we want to do is add some socials to the bottom, and maybe I want to have some more margin right here. So let's say I'm going to create a new margin class, which is probably even going to be margin top of 10. So we use a margin top of 100 pixels, and we replace this one with margin top of 10. So now we have this effect. And to me, it looks pretty cool. So let's go ahead and select or create an icon section. And in order to do so, we are going to use this comment again to separate our sections, to keep track of what we already have. And we'll say this is our socials icon section. So now let's get some icons. Let's go to Google and search for SVG icons. Now we are just going to SVG repo, but you can get your icons from basically any place you want. Right here we can say we want to have Instagram. So I'm going to download Instagram. I'm also going to get YouTube, for example. So I'm also going to download YouTube right here, and I'm going to download Discord. And I'm going to download this one right here. So now I have those 3 icons. I'm going to take them and I'm going to paste them inside of my images folder. So I have Discord SVG, I have this Instagram SVG, and I'm going to have this YouTube SVG. Obviously, it would be pretty good to go here and use built-in text editor, just copy and paste those icons. But to me, this is like a lot of wasted code that would make you basically lose track of the important code. So I'm just going to use the image tag because this is a lot shorter. So let's use image source. We're going to go into images and we say we want to have Instagram. Next thing we want to have is basically, let's say YouTube, and the last icon we want to have is our Discord icon. Now we can use an alt text of Instagram, YouTube, and Discord basically. So now we have this icon section, if you want to say. So now we'll give every single icon the class of icon. We're going to copy and paste this class to our other two elements and let's go into our style shield and start to style our .icon class. So obviously my icons are black right now and I have to use a little trick to get them white, but we can do so by using brightness of 0 and invert of 1. And now our icons should be white. And as you can see, they are. Let's use a width of 40 pixels, a height of 40 pixels, for example. But it should actually be enough to use the width. And let's also say we want to have an opacity of maybe 0.4, so they are slightly opaque, and yeah, maybe even give them a width of 30%. Now we also want to create a container for our icons, obviously. So I'm going to create an icon container. Inside of this icon container I have the icons. Inside of this icon container, for our icon container, let's use position absolute. And since our icon container is a child of our header, we need to set position relative to our header, which has a height of 100 viewport height. So once we go down here and we set bottom to 0, it should appear at the bottom, as you can see. So let's say we want to have some margin to the left and to the right, if you want to say so. So we set left and bottom to 20 pixels maybe. Now we could also go ahead and use flex right here and gap of 3, for example. So now we have a little gap, but that gap is probably a little bit too much, so we use gap 1, and now we have this effect. Obviously it also makes sense to put those images inside of an anchor tag. And you can obviously define any path you want for this anchor tag. Doesn't really make too much of a difference, but yeah, obviously you could link your Instagram whatsoever right here. So we're going to do the same for our Discord icon tag as well. And now we have those 3 icon tags that should be clickable, if you want to say so. And this is basically all you need to do to create this kind of website inside of HTML and CSS.